Hi, welcome to my eclectic channel. I'm Agnes and I make videos for fun. Today we're going to be putting together a dress and take a dive into the world of vintage knitting. So here's what we have to work with. Years ago I unraveled an oversized cotton sweater, and out of it I was able to make a skirt. And I also made a spaghetti strap shell, and then I also had a lace sweater. I was completely into lace at the time, lace knitting. All of that out of a sweater. And over the years I've continued to wear the skirt. I completely love it. And I wore the sweater for several years, but then I don't know, I got tired of it, and so recently I thought, okay, I have not been wearing it for so long, and when I have a piece of knitting that I realize I have not worn for many years, I unravel it and make something else with it. Another thing that happened is, for random reasons, I got into browsing vintage knitting patterns, and from there arose ideas as to what to do with that yarn from the sweater. So this is what we have to work with. So there's the skirt. I'm linking the pattern for the skirt in the description. That's not really vintage knitting, even though by now it's quite old, maybe 1990s, early 2000s I would guess. It's a pattern from an Italian yarn maker. I really like the Italian patterns because they're so, I don't know, they're just more stylish. they really have this thing that American patterns don't usually have. And then, to go even more feminine, the original design had a chevron, a standard chevron pattern on the bottom. And for me, this is where kind of the vintage comes in. Like I said, at the time I was really into lace knitting. So I replaced the chevron edging with it's called double rose insert, and I adapted it to make it so that it would fit on the bottom of the skirt. And then from the top, I'm using a pattern from the 1940s. Probably the two element that he still has, that this still has from the 1940s, is the back closure. It's really cute. And functional. The necklines of the 1940s were quite conservative, and so if you want to get this over your head, you need that little closure in the back. This would be more 1940s if I had put the sleeves on, but I'm not. And that's because later I have a plan of remember I had a lot of yarn, so I'll make a jacket to go over that. And the other element this has from the 1940s is the sizing. So the pattern for the top came from this leaflet from 1949. And they have so many really cute patterns. I just love this. There's a lot of inspiration here. Mine is at the very bottom. Here. It's good to save the front matter to the leaflet because often they have finishing tips and the abbreviations. So there's a number of techniques that are useful for the patterns that they explain. And if you're lucky, you get a sizing chart. But it doesn't matter if you know how to resize your patterns. The only math you need to use are proportionalities. I always check my gauge, but I've never matched my gauge. I figure out I rework the patterns to match my gauge and my size. And this is the pattern itself. The naming of those patterns are funny. This is labeled as a skirt and blouse, but at the end, the blouse and the skirt get attached together at the waist. And so for me, that's a dress. I've seen other patterns where they never attach the skirt and the blouse and they call it a dress. So it can go either way. But no matter what, they look really, really neat. So it's interesting to look at the finishing. Also, I will note that they have the instructions for the belt. Not all vintage pattern booklets have a date on them. And yet, having collected the patterns, I like to organize them in folders by decade. So I kind of learned how to distinguish them. This is one that I'm not 100% sure about. I think it's straggling 50s and 60s. I can't 100% place it. But let me go through some of the tips that I've learned to help distinguish between the decades, especially 30s, 40s, and 50s. The 60s start to be more distinctive, and the 20s, I don't think anyone would get the 20s confused with anything else. Now, where I have a lot of trouble is distinguishing between the 30s and 50s. Well, there are a lot of similarities. There are things that you can look for that help distinguish the two decades. So for me, it really begins with the 40s, because out of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it is the decade that's a little different. I think there's two things that help distinguish the 40s from the other decades on either side. One is the use of shoulder pads. You can read it in the pattern, and you can kind of, well, this one you can really see it. So, you know, pattern books have more than one pattern. So you look for something that's distinctive from the decade. Another thing is the skirts are more flowy and can also be shorter depending upon where this was in the 1940s. The hair and makeup doesn't really help, because it was short hair, curly lipstick. I think that carried over 3 decades, so not that helpful. If you're lucky to have skirts, it gets pretty easy to distinguish the 30s from the 50s. They have long skirts, and the skirts are longer, and what you will not find in a 1930s leaflet, the skirts in the 50s are those famous circle skirts. None of that in the 1930s. Another thing is that the necklines in the 1930s were very consistently conservative. And that's more subtle, but you can also use background objects. And also the quality of the pictures are different. It's all black and white, but the quality of the 1930s pictures is lower. You can tell the technology was not quite the same. Some distinctive features of the 1950s, there's a wider variety of garment. You get things that are less fitted, especially when they had the pencil skirts. They tended to have jackets and coats that were less fitted. They have more colorful accessories. Like I said, the quality of the pictures is different. And then it kind of become obvious they had those cropped tops to go with the circle skirts. And as I've mentioned, necklines. Like if you see a plunging neckline, that's an evening top out of a 1950s leaflet. The colors may or may not be there, so these happen to be in colors, but you cannot rely on that. The top is all finished. I followed the instructions. Single crochet around the neckline and to the back, and a single crochet on the bottom. This time for the bottom I used a bigger crochet hook because I do want this to have enough stretch, because it's got to get over the shoulders and everything. And then for the sleeves, I finished that with the double crochet with my smaller crochet hook, because that needs to be a little tight. And then we have the skirt. So I'm going to stray away from the finishing that's suggested in the pattern. So in the pattern they also suggest to finish the top of the skirt with a single crochet. There's no need. Mine is already all finished. It's neat, and it's going to go into a seam anyway. And then they also, there's still a technique that I'll try in another garment of mine, another skirt. But they with the crochet, they propose to work a casing of sort to thread an elastic through, because this is quite loose. Now I've made a number of knitted skirts. I put elastics on a couple of them, but another technique that I like to use on my knitted skirts so that they stay at my waist is a cord. So I take just the matching yarn, and here this is amazing that it lasted over this many years. Sometimes I'll do a crochet chain. This time I just took this is a single strand, guys, from the yarn, and I threaded it through the waist and it never broke. Pretty good cotton. So I'll keep that. I don't think I need an elastic. I will keep this thread around the waist to cinch the dress, and then we'll use the belt around it to when I wear it. So really the only thing that I need to do then is to attach the top and the bottom. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.